You were never down here. But this says otherwise.
The necklace shouldn't have been there. Felix Greaves pulled his headlamp closer to the conduit wall, 40 feet below downtown Cedar Vale. The city's emergency grid had failed 3 hours ago, leaving half the financial district dark. While everyone else stood around complaining about their dead phones, Felix descended into the tunnels that kept civilization running. He'd been mapping underground electrical systems for 12 years. Every wire, every junction box, every forgotten maintenance shaft, he knew them all. So when his flashlight caught something silver wedged behind a relay switch that hadn't been opened since 1987, Felix stopped breathing. A delicate chain necklace tangled around a crushed envelope, the kind of jewelry his wife Lorna wore to her fancy placemaking conferences. The envelope bore a Milan airline logo and her name printed in block letters. Felix's work partner Jimmy called down from street level. "How's it looking?" "5 more minutes," Felix replied, pocketing the necklace and envelope. His voice stayed steady, even as his pulse hammered against his throat. The ticket stub inside showed a departure date from 3 weeks ago. The same weekend Lorna claimed she'd been visiting her sister in Portland. The same weekend she'd returned home with a mysterious rash on her neck and a new habit of checking her phone in the bathroom. Felix restored power to the grid in 4 minutes. He'd been fixing other people's problems his whole life. Time to fix his own. 2 days later. Lorna stood in their kitchen, steam rising from her organic coffee, scrolling through emails with the focused intensity of someone managing important things. She wore a cream blazer that cost more than Felix's monthly salary. Her dark hair pulled into the kind of effortless bun that actually took 20 minutes to perfect. "The Morrison project got approved," she said without looking up. "I'll be working late again this week." Felix nodded, spreading peanut butter on toast. "Which one's Morrison?" "The waterfront revitalization. I told you about it." Her tone carried that familiar edge of impatience, the one that suggested Felix wasn't paying attention to her very important work. Right. Felix had learned not to ask follow-up questions about Lorna's projects. She'd explained that urban planning was complicated, that he wouldn't understand the nuances of community development and historic preservation. Better to stay in his lane, fixing lights and staying quiet. His phone buzzed. Text from Jimmy. "Another blackout scheduled for Maple District tonight. Overtime if you want it." "I might be working late too," Felix said. Lorna glanced up, surprised. "Really? What's the job?" "Routine maintenance. Nothing glamorous." She smiled, the first genuine expression he'd seen from her in weeks. "Good for you. We could both use the extra money." Felix watched her gather her things, kiss his cheek with distracted affection, and head for the door. The same ritual they'd performed for 8 years of marriage. Except now he knew about Milan. Now he knew about the lies. After her car disappeared down Cedar Avenue, Felix retrieved the necklace from his toolbox. The pendant was a small silver compass, engraved with coordinates he didn't recognize. He'd never seen Lorna wear it, which meant she'd lost it somewhere she wasn't supposed to be. His phone rang. Everett Brixton's name flashed on the screen. "Felix, buddy, how's the underground kingdom treating you?" Rhett had been Felix's best friend since college, back when they'd both believed they'd change the world. Rhett had actually tried, working his way up from campaign volunteer to deputy communications director for the mayor's office. He had the kind of easy charm that opened doors and loosened tongues, the kind of presence that made people want to be around him. "Same tunnels, different day," Felix said. "What's up?" "Listen, I'm putting together a proposal for the Morrison waterfront project. You know anything about the electrical infrastructure down there?" Felix's grip tightened on the phone. "Morrison? That's Lorna's project, isn't it?" "Yeah, we're collaborating on it. City planning and political feasibility, that whole dance. I was hoping you could give me some technical insight, maybe walk me through the utility access points. When do you need this?" "Soon as possible. I'm meeting with the planning committee Thursday, and I want to make sure we're not promising something we can't deliver." "I'll see what I can do." "You're the best, Felix. Hey, tell Lorna I said thanks for all her help. She's been putting in serious hours on this thing." The line went dead. Felix stared at his phone, pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. Lorna working late. Rhett needing technical information. Both of them involved in the same project that required so many evening meetings and weekend consultations. Felix opened his laptop and pulled up the city's utility database. Morrison Waterfront Project, approved 2 weeks ago. Primary consultant, Lorna Greaves, Cedar Vale Placemaking Solutions. Political liaison, Everett Brixton. Mayor's office. The project timeline showed planning meetings every Tuesday and Thursday evening for the past 2 months. The same nights Lorna claimed to be working alone at her office. The same night she came home smelling like expensive cologne that wasn't Felix's. He needed proof. Not suspicions, not coincidences, but actual evidence of what his wife and best friend were doing behind his back. Felix opened his toolbox and pulled out a small device that looked like a hearing aid battery. The audio transmitter was designed for monitoring electrical equipment in hazardous environments, but it worked just as well for other kinds of surveillance. That night, while Lorna showered, Felix carefully placed the transmitter inside the pocket of her vintage leather purse. The bag was her constant companion, a restored 1960s piece she'd bought at an estate sale and carried everywhere like a security blanket. He tested the signal on his phone. Crystal clear audio up to 200 feet, more than enough range for whatever meetings she was really attending. The next evening, Felix sat in his truck outside the Morrison construction site, watching the signal strength on his phone. Lorna's purse was somewhere inside the half-finished building, along with whatever conversation she was having with Rhett. The audio came through with startling clarity. "Can't keep doing this. Felix is getting suspicious," Lorna's voice, stressed and breathless. "What kind of suspicious?" Rhett's response was calm, almost amused. "He asked about the Morrison project. He never asks about my work. So we're careful. We've made it this far." 3 months, Rhett. 3 months of lying to him, and for what? So you can get the mayor's endorsement for your campaign? And so you can get the biggest urban development contract in the county. Don't pretend this is just about me. A long pause. Felix heard footsteps, the rustle of clothing. "I hate lying to him," Lorna said, her voice softer now. "He's a good man. He doesn't deserve this." "Good men finish last, Lorna. You said so yourself. You said you were tired of being married to someone who was satisfied with fixing other people's lights while his own life stayed dark." Felix's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Those were his wife's words, his wife's voice describing their marriage to another man. "I know what I said. But when I see him making breakfast every morning, when he asks about my day like he actually cares, he cares about the routine, not about you. When's the last time he surprised you? When's the last time he made you feel like you were worth fighting for?" More silence. Then sounds Felix didn't want to interpret. "We need to be smarter about this," Rhett said eventually. "The project approval comes through next week. After that, we can figure out the long-term situation." "What long-term situation?" "You know what I mean. You can't stay married to him forever." "I can't just leave Felix. The house, the savings account, everything we've built, we'll figure it out. Trust me." The audio cut out as they moved beyond the transmitter's range. Felix sat in his truck, staring at the half-finished building that housed his crumbling marriage. Lorna wasn't just having an affair. She was planning to leave him, planning to take everything they'd built together and hand it over to the man who'd been his best friend for 15 years. Felix started the truck and drove home. By the time Lorna returned, he was in bed, pretending to sleep. She slipped in beside him, careful not to wake him, and Felix lay there listening to her breathe, wondering how long she'd been planning his destruction. 3 days later, Felix's sister Sylvie called during his lunch break. She worked as a paralegal for one of Cedar Vale's most aggressive law firms, the kind of place that specialized in messy divorces and corporate malfeasance. "I need to ask you something," she said without preamble. "Has Lorna been making any big financial moves lately? Real estate, investments, anything like that?" Felix nearly choked on his sandwich. "Why?" "Because her name came up in a property search I was running for a client. She's listed as a co-owner on a condo downtown. Expensive place, bought 6 months ago." "That's impossible." "We don't own any other property." "The address is 1247 Harbor View, Unit 412. Want me to dig deeper?" Felix's hands shook as he wrote down the address. How deep can you dig? Deep enough to find out who else is on the deed, how it was financed, what other assets might be tied to it. But Felix, if I'm going to do this, I need to know why. Because I think my wife is planning to leave me. And I think she's been moving money around to make sure I don't get any of it. Sylvie was quiet for a long moment. "Meet me at Morrison's bar tonight, 7 o'clock. And Felix? Don't tell anyone we're meeting, not even Lorna." Felix spent the rest of his shift thinking about the condo. Harbor View was the most expensive address in Cedar Vale, the kind of place where a one-bedroom costs more than most people's annual salary. If Lorna had bought property there, she'd used money Felix didn't know about, money that should have been theirs together. That evening, He told Lorna he was working late. She barely looked up from her laptop, murmuring something about the Morrison project and kissing his cheek with distracted affection. Morrison's bar was a dim, wood-paneled place that catered to lawyers and politicians. Sylvie was already there, nursing a glass of wine and reading through a thick folder. "Sit down," she said. "We need to talk." Felix slid into the booth across from her. His sister was 3 years younger, but looked older, her blonde hair streaked with premature gray from years of dealing with other people's disasters. She'd never liked Lorna, had always said there was something calculating about her smile. "The condo is owned by LEB Holdings," Sylvie said, opening the folder. "Limited liability company, registered in Delaware. The managing partners are Lorna E. Greaves and Everett R. Brixton." Felix felt the blood drain from his face. "Rhett. Your friend Rhett, yes. They bought it for $400,000, financed through a shell company that traces back to Morrison Development Funds. Your wife has been using her position as project consultant to move money around, and your best friend has been helping her do it. That's fraud. That's the tip of the iceberg." Sylvie pulled out more documents. "I ran a full asset search on both of them. Did you know your retirement account was transferred to a joint investment fund last month? One that Lorna has sole access to?" Felix stared at the papers. His signature was on the transfer documents, but he had no memory of signing them. "How is that possible?" "Power of attorney. You signed it 3 years ago when you had that appendectomy, remember? Standard procedure so she could make medical decisions if something went wrong. Except she never canceled it, and she's been using it to make financial decisions in your name. How much? $83,000? Your entire retirement, plus the equity loan she took out against your house." Felix's vision blurred. "Our house? She borrowed against it 6 months ago. If you can't make the payments, the bank can foreclose. And since she's not planning to be married to you much longer, guess who's going to be responsible for that debt?" Felix stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Several other patrons looked over, but he didn't care. "I need to get some air." Outside, the evening was warm and humid, the kind of weather that made everything feel sticky and uncomfortable. Felix leaned against the brick wall of the bar, trying to process what Sylvie had told him. His wife and best friend hadn't just betrayed him. They'd been systematically robbing him, using his trust and his signature to steal everything he'd worked for. Sylvie followed him outside. "Felix, I know this is a lot to take in." "A lot to take in?" Felix laughed, but there was no humor in it. "My wife has been sleeping with my best friend, stealing my money, and planning to leave me homeless." "Yeah, that's a lot to take in. We can fix this. That's why I wanted to meet you here, away from anyone who might know Lorna or Rhett. If we're smart about this, we can get your money back and make sure they both pay for what they've done." Felix looked at his sister, really looked at her. Sylvie had always been the fighter in their family, the one who stood up to bullies and refused to back down from a challenge. She'd built her career on helping wronged spouses get revenge on cheating partners, and she was very good at her job. "What do you have in mind?" "First, we document everything, every transaction, every meeting, every lie they've told. Then we file for emergency asset protection and divorce proceedings. While they're scrambling to explain their financial irregularities, we hit them with fraud charges and a civil lawsuit. Will it work? It'll work. But Felix, once we start this, there's no going back. Lorna will hate you, Rhett will never speak to you again, and everyone in Cedar Vale will know what happened. Are you prepared for that?" Felix thought about the audio recording from the construction site, about Lorna's voice describing their marriage as something she was tired of. He thought about 15 years of friendship with Rhett, 15 years of trust and loyalty that had been repaid with betrayal and theft. "They already made their choice," he said. "Time for me to make mine." 1 week later, Felix spent the next 7 days living a double life. During the day, he went to work, fixed lights, and pretended everything was normal. In the evenings, he helped Sylvie build their case, photographing documents, recording conversations, and gathering evidence of the financial fraud. The audio transmitter in Lorna's purse proved invaluable. He heard her complaining to Rhett about Felix's increasingly suspicious behavior, heard them discussing their timeline for liquidating assets and leaving Cedar Vale. Most damaging of all, he heard them laughing about how easy it had been to fool him. "He signed that power of attorney without even reading it," Lorna said during one particularly devastating conversation. "Just trusted me completely. It would almost be sweet if it wasn't so pathetic." "Guy's been fixing other people's problems so long he can't see his own," Rhett replied. Makes our job easier." Felix saved every recording, every damning piece of evidence that would destroy both their lives, but he wasn't ready to strike yet. He needed the perfect moment, the perfect stage for their public humiliation. That moment came when Lorna announced she was organizing a press conference to unveil the Morrison Waterfront project. The mayor would be there, along with the city council and several prominent business leaders. It would be the biggest event of her career, the moment she'd been working toward for months. "It's going to be amazing," she told Felix over dinner. "We're finally going to show people what real urban development looks like, how you can preserve historic character while creating modern economic opportunities." Felix nodded and smiled, playing the supportive husband. "I'm proud of you." "Thank you. That means a lot." She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "I know I've been distracted lately, but this project means everything to me. After next week, things will be different." "I'm sure they will." The press conference was scheduled for Friday afternoon at the construction site. Felix spent Thursday night preparing his own surprise for the event, working with Sylvie to coordinate the timing of their legal ambush. "The divorce papers will be served at 10 a.m., Sylvie explained. "Asset freeze goes into effect at 10:30. The fraud investigation opens at 11. By the time she gets to her press conference, her whole world will be falling apart." "What about Rhett?" "He gets served at the same time. Civil court appearance Monday morning, criminal referral by end of business Friday. Neither of them will be in any condition to talk to reporters about waterfront development." Felix felt a cold satisfaction settle in his chest. For months, Lorna and Rhett had been planning his destruction, moving pieces around the board while he remained oblivious. Now it was his turn to make the moves while they stumbled around blind. Friday morning. Felix woke before dawn, careful not to disturb Lorna. She was sleeping peacefully, her face relaxed in a way it never was during waking hours. In a few hours, that peace would be shattered forever. He dressed quietly and drove to the Morrison construction site. The building was nearly finished, a gleaming testament to Lorna's vision of urban renewal. In a few hours, it would be the site of her professional funeral. Felix had legitimate business at the construction site. The electrical inspection was scheduled for that morning, and he needed to sign off on the safety systems before the building could be occupied. He'd been looking forward to this inspection for weeks, not because of the work, but because of what it would allow him to do. The building's main electrical panel was located in the basement, easily accessible from the street. Felix had been planning this moment since he'd first learned about the fraud, and he'd practiced the sequence of actions dozens of times in his head. At exactly 9:47 a.m., Felix opened the main breaker panel and flipped a single switch. The action was subtle, nearly invisible, but it would cause a cascading failure in the building's electrical system. Not dangerous. Felix wasn't trying to hurt anyone, but dramatic enough to trigger an immediate evacuation and safety inspection. The press conference was scheduled to begin at 1 p.m. By 12:45, the building would be crawling with fire marshals and safety inspectors. The event would be canceled, and Lorna would be standing in front of news cameras with nothing to show for months of work. Felix finished his inspection, filed his report, and drove home. Lorna was in the kitchen, dressed in her best suit, reviewing her presentation notes one final time. "How do I look?" she asked, turning to face him. "Beautiful," Felix said, and meant it. Despite everything she'd done, despite the lies and the theft and the betrayal, Lorna was still the most beautiful woman he'd ever known. "You're going to do great today." She smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her in months. "Thank you. I know this hasn't been easy with me working so much lately, but after today, we can focus on us again." Felix nodded, knowing there would be no us after today, knowing that in a matter of hours, sheriff's deputies would be knocking on their door with divorce papers and fraud charges. At 10 a.m., his phone buzzed with a text from Sylvie. "Papers served. Both targets in custody of legal process. Asset freeze in effect." Felix deleted the message and went back to his coffee. Lorna was upstairs, probably getting another text from Rhett about some last-minute detail for the press conference. Neither of them knew their phones were about to start ringing with calls from lawyers and process servers. At 10:15, Lorna's phone rang. Felix heard her answer in the bedroom, heard her voice change from cheerful to confused to panicked in the space of 30 seconds. "What do you mean, asset freeze?" Her voice carried down the stairs. "There must be some mistake. I haven't done anything." The conversation continued for several minutes, Lorna's tone growing increasingly desperate. Felix heard her calling Rhett, heard her leaving voicemails when he didn't answer. She came downstairs looking pale and shaken. "Felix, something's wrong. The bank is saying our accounts are frozen, that there's some kind of investigation. And I can't reach Rhett." "Maybe you should call a lawyer," Felix suggested. I don't understand what's happening. The press conference is in 3 hours, and now this. Her phone rang again. This time it was her assistant, calling to say that the Morrison building had been evacuated due to electrical problems, and the press conference was canceled. Lorna sank into a kitchen chair, staring at her phone as if it might explain how her perfect day had turned into a nightmare. I need to go to the site, she said. I need to see what's wrong. Are you sure that's a good idea? If there are electrical problems, it's my project, Felix. My responsibility. She grabbed her purse and keys, moving with the mechanical precision of someone in shock. I'll call you later. Felix watched her drive away, knowing it would be the last time she left their house as his wife. By the time she returned, the divorce papers would be waiting, along with a full accounting of her crimes. That afternoon, Felix spent the afternoon at Morrison's bar, nursing a beer and waiting for Sylvie's call. The bar was quiet, just a few regulars watching sports on the television, oblivious to the drama unfolding across town. At 3:30, Sylvie called. It's done. Lorna's been arrested on fraud charges. Rhett's in custody for conspiracy and embezzlement. The district attorney is calling it one of the most brazen cases of municipal corruption they've seen in years. What happens now? Now they get to explain to a judge how they stole $83,000 from your retirement account and used city development funds to buy themselves a love nest. Should be an interesting conversation. Felix felt a strange emptiness in his chest. He'd been planning this moment for weeks, but now that it was here, he felt no satisfaction, no sense of victory, just the hollow ache of a life that had been built on lies. Are you okay? Sylvie asked. I don't know. I thought I'd feel better about this. Revenge is never as satisfying as people think it will be. But justice? Justice feels pretty good once the shock wears off. Felix finished his beer and drove home. The house felt different now, quieter somehow. Lorna's presence had always filled the space, her energy and ambition in constant motion. Without her, the room seemed to echo. He found the divorce papers on the kitchen table, along with a note from the sheriff's deputy who'd served them. Everything was official now, legal and irreversible. Felix opened a bottle of wine, a good bottle, one they'd been saving for a special occasion, and poured himself a glass. Then he sat in his living room and tried to figure out what to do with the rest of his life. 2 weeks later, the story dominated local news for days. Local officials arrested in development fraud scheme was the headline in the Cedarvale Tribune, accompanied by photos of Lorna and Rhett being led away in handcuffs. The details were even more damaging than Felix had hoped. The investigation revealed that Lorna and Rhett had been skimming money from multiple development projects, using their positions to steer contracts to companies they secretly owned. The Harbor View condo was just one of several properties they'd purchased with stolen funds. Felix's name appeared in the articles as the victim, but the reporters were careful to protect his privacy. Most people in Cedar Vale didn't know the full extent of his involvement in bringing down the corruption scheme. Lorna was released on bail after 3 days, but she didn't come home. Her lawyer had advised her to stay away from Felix while the criminal and civil cases proceeded. She was living in a motel across town, her career destroyed, her reputation in ruins. Rhett fared even worse. The mayor's office fired him immediately, and the state Democratic Party revoked his endorsement for the city council race he'd been planning to run. His face was on the front page of every newspaper in the county, identified as the ringleader of the fraud scheme. Felix should have felt vindicated. Instead, he felt empty. The house was too quiet, the routines too familiar. He'd spent so much energy planning his revenge that he hadn't thought about what would come after. On a Thursday evening, he was sitting in his kitchen when someone knocked on the door. Felix opened it to find Rhett standing on his porch looking haggard and desperate. "We need to talk," Rhett said. Felix stepped aside and let him in. Rhett looked around the living room as if seeing it for the first time, taking in the wedding photos and vacation souvenirs that documented 15 years of friendship and marriage. "I know you're angry," Rhett began. "Angry?" Felix laughed. "Rhett, you stole my retirement money and slept with my wife. Angry doesn't begin to cover it. I never meant for it to happen this way." "Which part? The stealing or the lying?" Rhett sat down heavily on the couch. "Both. Neither. I don't know, Felix. It started as a business relationship, coordinating on the Morrison project. Then it became something else." "When? What? When did it become something else? When did you decide to betray 15 years of friendship?" Rhett was quiet for a long moment. "You remember that night last year when Sarah left me? I called you. drunk and angry, and you came over and listened to me complain for hours. Felix remembered. Rhett's girlfriend had broken up with him over text message, and he'd been devastated. Felix had spent the whole night listening to him vent about failed relationships and missed opportunities. You told me I needed to stop waiting for perfect and start fighting for what I wanted, Rhett continued. You said life was too short to waste on regrets. I was talking about dating, not destroying marriages. I know, but when I met with Lorna about the Morrison project, when I saw how unhappy she was, how trapped she felt, trapped, Felix's voice rose. She was trapped in a marriage where she was loved and supported and given everything she needed to build her career. She said you didn't understand her ambitions, that you were content to stay small while she wanted to build something bigger. So you helped her build it by stealing my money. The money was her idea. She said you'd never miss it, that you weren't ambitious enough to do anything with it anyway. Felix stared at his former best friend, this man he'd trusted with his deepest fears and greatest hopes. Get out. Felix, please. Get out of my house. Get out of my life. And if you ever come back here, I'll call the police. Rhett stood up slowly, his face pale. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't mean anything now, but I am sorry. You're sorry you got caught. There's a difference. Rhett walked to the door, then turned back. For what it's worth, she never loved me. Not really. She loved the idea of what I could do for her career, but she never loved me. That's supposed to make me feel better? It's supposed to make you understand that you weren't the only one who got played. Lorna used both of us to get what she wanted. Felix slammed the door behind him and stood in his hallway, breathing hard. Even now, even after everything, Rhett was trying to make himself the victim, trying to find some common ground between them. But there was no common ground. There was no forgiveness. There was only the hollow satisfaction of watching his enemies destroy themselves. 1 month later. The trials were swift and brutal. Lorna pleaded guilty to fraud and embezzlement in exchange for a reduced sentence, 2 years in minimum security prison, and full restitution of the stolen funds. Rhett got 5 years for conspiracy and racketeering, his political career finished before it had really begun. Felix got his money back, plus damages and legal fees. The house was his, the debt cleared, his retirement account restored. He'd won completely, decisively, without compromise. But victory felt strangely hollow. The house was too quiet, his routines too predictable. He'd spent so much energy on revenge that he'd forgotten how to live for himself. On a rainy Tuesday morning, Felix drove to the Morrison waterfront construction site. The building stood finished but empty, a monument to ambition and corruption. The city had canceled the development project after the scandal, leaving the structure unused and unloved. Felix parked across the street and studied the building. It was beautiful, he had to admit. Lorna had designed something special, something that could have transformed the waterfront district. Her vision had been grand and inspiring, even if her methods had been criminal. A for sale sign hung in the window. The asking price was a fraction of what the building had cost to construct. Felix pulled out his phone and called the listing agent. I'm interested in the Morrison building, he said. What would it take to buy it? 3 months later, Felix stood in the basement of the Morrison building, installing the final electrical panel. The renovation had taken months, but he'd done most of the work himself, taking his time to understand every wire and junction box. The building was going to be his new business headquarters. Greaves Electrical Solutions, specializing in urban infrastructure consulting. He'd already landed 3 city contracts using his reputation and expertise to build something entirely his own. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was succeeding with Lorna's building, using the space she designed for her own ambitions to launch his new career. Justice had a sense of humor. His phone buzzed with a text from Sylvie. Grand opening party still on for Friday? Felix typed back, wouldn't miss it. He'd invited 50 people to the grand opening, friends, colleagues, city officials, business leaders, people who knew his story, who understood what the building represented, not just his professional success, but his personal resurrection. Felix finished connecting the last wire and tested the electrical system. Every light in the building flickered on, casting warm illumination through the empty rooms. The city hummed around him, full of problems that needed solving, infrastructure that needed maintaining. For 12 years, he'd worked underground, fixing other people's systems while his own life fell apart above ground. Now, he was building something new, something that belonged entirely to him. Felix climbed the stairs to the main floor and looked out the windows at Cedar Vale's waterfront. The view was spectacular, the kind of panorama that made people stop and take notice. Lorna had chosen well, even if she'd lost the right to enjoy it. His phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize. Greaves Electrical Solutions. Mr. Greaves? This is Jennifer Walsh from the Portland Development Authority. We understand you specialize in urban infrastructure consulting. That's correct. We have a waterfront project that might interest you. Are you available for a site visit next week? Felix smiled, looking out at the lights of Cedar Vale twinkling in the darkness. I'll be there. He hung up and walked through his new building one more time, checking each room, each system, each detail that would support his future success. Everything was exactly as it should be. The lights flickered on. The city didn't notice, but one man saw it all.